Good evening. Happy Tuesday, wherever you may be. I am Aaron Sagers, and this is the Paranormal Pop Culture Fireside Chats, which we have been having during this time of isolation and quarantine. And, well, I scheduled this one rather late. I actually wasn't planning on doing this tonight. It was quite busy with things going on in regular life. So I didn't know if I'd be able to get this going. But I decided let's throw the invitation out there. And I decided, because of the topic tonight, that a fez and scarf were somewhat appropriate, as was a skull ring, which I quite like. Don't wear it too often. But for those of you that appreciate fashion, it is an Alexander McQueen ring, so I quite like it. And there are people already gathering in the room, and I do want to say hello to them. Carly, good evening. Thank you for joining us on such short notice. Dory, once again, you are here, and my happy wave back to you. Thank you for being here. Now, ghostly tales. Be careful what you wish for. I was thinking about a story that I might like to tell tonight. It was difficult, trying to come up with the right one. And a couple other people are joining the room. Let me say hi really quickly. Dawn, hello to you. Good to see you. Andrea is here. Thought she was out for a walk, but she's back. Sean, yes, the fez is appropriate for this kind of story, and you will soon understand why. So, the tale that I am going to tell, I invited you here with the promise of be careful what you wish for. Does anyone have any guesses about the story that I'm going to tell? And while you are guessing, let me go ahead and give a shout out to the sponsor of the night, who has been sponsoring our little talks here. I want to say hello, or give a not hello, but a warm word of appreciation to Dead Run, the book by Mike Maddox, available only on Amazon Kindle, who has kindly decided to sponsor these fireside chats, available only on Amazon Kindle for, I believe, only like $2.99, which is rather inexpensive to have a book to occupy your time during these isolation days. And it's I don't want to tease too much, but in the opening pages, the protagonist just feels compelled to run and suddenly goes outside and sees everyone else out there running. The infirmed, the elderly, everyone out there, it feels the need in their bodies to go out there and run. Not everyone runs as well as our protagonist, and when they stop running, when they get tired, bad things happen. Hence this apocalyptic, I guess you could say, sci-fi adjacent story, available only on Amazon Kindle, Dead Run by Mike Maddox. You run or you die. I believe only $2.99, and that is a steal for a book that's going to occupy your time. So, I did ask, and hello, Stacy. Glad you could join us. And Amanda, I owe you a message. I have not forgotten you. And hello, Jack. Jack's here, and I'm appreciative to see Jack. Jack has been hosting his own little chats, and he started using this platform, StreamYard, so I'm glad it's working out for him. So I asked what would be the story that we would tell tonight, and Dory got it. Got it in one. Monkey's Paw. That's right. We are our ghost tale reading tonight It's going to be The Monkey's Paw by W. Jacobs from 1902. W. Jacobs actually was known. It's considered a great piece of American literature, but he was an Englishman. And he was largely known for his humorist work, I believe. So to have gotten this story so right when he wasn't even a horror author, I think is pretty cool. And hello to you, Jordan. Hey, my friend, my brother down there in Georgia. Hopefully, I don't think you guys should be open for business yet, but I hope you're being safe down there. And Jessica, thumbs up to you. And Jeff, fezzes are cool, my friend. So, now before I get into it, I do want to say I was inspired by this story, wanting to tell a creepy story tonight. I was inspired to make an accompanying cocktail of my own device, my own concoction. And it is called The Curse of the Monkey's Paw, as I have so deemed it, and it is served in a monkey tiki glass. Now, you may not have a monkey tiki glass, but I will tell you real briefly what's in this. In fact, I'm going to post a separate video about this once we finish with this. I had to test it to see if it actually was any good before I could promote it, but it is actually quite tasty. But The Curse of the Monkey's Paw, 1/2 ounce lime juice, 1 ounce pineapple juice, unsweetened, 1 ounce orange juice. Okay, then we get to the fun stuff. 1 ounce Sailor Jerry spiced rum, 1 ounce plantation pineapple rum. Really good stuff. You should definitely get it. So already starting strong. Sailor Jerry and plantation pineapple rum. Gets a little interesting from there. We have 3/4 ounces of creme de banana. And I like to add 1 ounce of dark Jamaican rum, 1/2 ounce of 151 proof rum, dark rum, and 1/2 ounce of a coconut rum. So you might be wondering why I called it The Curse of the Monkey's Paw, because you might be feeling cursed if you drink too many of these. And you mix it with a lot of ice, you shake it all up, garnish it with some nice banana, and if you have a little skull swizzle, put that in there. And then I also added a nice little poison dart. So delightful and dangerous, and quite punchy. Tastes like a good punch, but the banana definitely comes out, even though we use a small bit of it. So it's really good, but it is potent. And hey there, Rich. Good to see you. Thanks for joining. Carly, it is very yum. It's all sorts of yum. So, with that said, shall we get reading? Now, while I read, I won't be able to really see too many of the comments, so bear with me, and we will join back up on the other side, but I'll be with you. Now, because I did decide to do this rather spontaneously, I did not get a chance to refresh myself with this text, so we're going in hot here. So pardon me for any stumbles I might make. This will take about a 25-minute story, so bear with me. The Monkey's Paw. And the quote to begin with is, quote, "Be careful what you wish for, you may receive it," which is an anonymous quote. Part 1. Outside, the night was cold and wet, but in the small living room, the curtains were closed, and the fire burned brightly. Father and son were playing chess. The father, whose ideas about the game involved some very unusual moves, putting his king into such sharp and unnecessary danger that it even brought comment from the white-haired old lady knitting quietly by the fire. "Listen to the wind," said Mr. White, who, having seen a mistake that could cost him the game after it was too late, was trying to stop his son from seeing it. "I'm listening," said the son, seriously studying the board as he stretched out his hand. "Check." "I should hardly think that he'll come tonight," said his father, with his hand in the air and another hand held over the board. "And mate," replied the son. "That's the worst of living so far out," cried Mr. White, with sudden and unexpected violence. Of all the awful, out-of-the-way places to live in, this is the worst. Can't walk on the footpath without getting stuck in the mud, and the road's a river. I don't even know what the people are thinking about. I suppose they think it doesn't matter because only 2 houses in the road have people in them. Never mind, dear, said his wife calmly. Perhaps you'll win the next one. Mr. White looked up sharply, just in time to see a knowing look between the mother and son. The words died away on his lips, and he hid a guilty smile in his thin gray beard. There he is, said Herbert White as the gate banged shut loudly and heavy footsteps came towards the door. The old man rose quickly and, opening the door, was heard telling the new arrival how sorry he was for his recent loss. The new arrival talked about his sadness so that Mrs. White said, "Tut, tut," and coughed gently as her husband entered the room, followed by a tall, heavy-built, strong-looking man whose skin had the healthy reddish color associated with outdoor life and whose eyes showed that he could be a dangerous enemy. Sergeant Major Morris, he said, introducing himself to his wife and his son Herbert. Sergeant Major shook hands and, taking the offered seat by the fire, watched with satisfaction as Mr. White got out whiskey and glasses. After the third glass, his eyes got brighter and he began to talk. The little family circle listened with growing interest to this visitor from distant parts. As he squared his broad shoulders in the chair and spoke of wild scenes, he also spoke of brave acts, of wars, and strange people. 21 years of it, said Mr. White, looking at his wife and son. When he went away, he was a thin young man. Now look at him. He doesn't look to have taken much harm, said Mrs. White politely. I'd like to go to India myself, said the old man. Just look around a bit, you know. Better where you are, said the sergeant major, shaking his head. He put down the empty glass and, sighing softly, shook it again. I should like to see those old temples and fakers and the street entertainers, said the old man. What was it that you started telling me the other day about a monkey's paw or something, Morris? Nothing, said the soldier quickly. At least nothing worth hearing. Monkey's paw, said Mrs. White curiously. Well, it's just a bit of what you might call magic, perhaps, said the sergeant major, without first stopping to think. His 3 listeners leaned forward excitedly. Deep in thought, the visitor put his empty glass to his lip and then set it down again. Mr. White filled it again for him. To look at it, said the sergeant major, feeling about in his pocket, it's just an ordinary little paw dried to a mummy. He did take something out of his pocket and held it out for them. Mrs. White drew back with a look of disgust, but her son, taking it, examined it curiously. And what is there special about it? Asked Mr. White as he took it from his son and, having examined it, placed it on the table. It had a spell put on it by an old magician, said the sergeant major. A very holy man. He wanted to show that fate ruled people's lives and that those who tried to change it would be sorry. He put a spell on it so that 3 different men could each have 3 different wishes from it. The way he told the story showed that he truly believed it, and his listeners became aware that their light laughter was out of place and actually hurt him a little. Well, why don't you have 3, sir? Said Herbert cleverly. The soldier looked at him the way that the middle-aged usually look at disrespectful youth. I have, he said quietly, and his face turned white. And did you really have the 3 wishes granted? Asked Mrs. White. I did, said the sergeant major, and his glass tapped against his strong teeth. And has anybody else wished? Continued the old lady. The first man had his 3 wishes, was the reply. I don't know what the first 2 were, but the third, Well, that was for death. And that is how I got the paw. His voice was so serious that the group fell silent. If you've had your 3 wishes, it's no good to you now, then, Morris, said the old man at last. What do you keep it for? Soldier shook his head. Fancy, I suppose, he said slowly. I did have some idea of selling it, but I don't think I will. It has caused me enough trouble already. Besides, people won't buy. They think it's just a story. Well, some of them. And those who do think anything of it want to try it first and pay me afterwards. If you could have another 3 wishes, said the old man, watching him carefully, would you have them? I don't know, said the other. I don't know. He took the paw and, holding it between his front finger and thumb, suddenly threw it on the fire. And Mr. White, with a slight cry, quickly bent down and took it up. Better let it burn, said the soldier sadly, but in a way that let him know he believed it to be true. If you don't want it, Morris, said the other, give it to me. I won't, said his friend with stubborn determination. I threw it on the fire. If you keep it, don't hold me responsible for what happens. Throw it on the fire like a sensible man. The other shook his head and examined his new possession closely. How do you do it? He asked. Hold it up in your right hand. State your wish out loud so that it can be heard, said the sergeant major. But I warn you what might happen. Sounds like the Arabian Nights, said Mrs. White as she rose and began to set dinner. Don't you think you might wish for 4 pairs of hands for me? She said with a chuckle. Her husband drew the talisman from his pocket, and all 3 laughed loudly as the sergeant major, with a look of alarm on his face, caught him by the arm. If you must wish, he demanded, wish for something sensible. Mr. White dropped it back in his pocket and, placing chairs, motioned his friend to the table. In the business of dinner, the talisman was partly forgotten, and afterwards the 3 sat fascinated as they listened to more of the soldiers' stories from India. If the tale of the monkey's paw is not more truthful than those he has been telling us, said Herbert, as the door closed behind their guest, just in time to catch the last train, we shan't make much of it. Did you give anything for it, father? Asked Mrs. White, watching her husband closely. A little, he said, coloring slightly. He didn't want it, but I made him take it, and he pressed me again to just throw it away. Not likely, said Herbert with pretend horror. Why, we're going to be rich and famous and happy. Smiling, he said, wish to be a king, father, to begin with. Then mother, she can't complain all the time. He ran quickly around the table, chased by the laughing Mrs. White, armed with a piece of cloth. Mr. White, he took the paw from his pocket and eyed it doubtfully. I don't know what to wish for, and that's a fact, he said slowly. It seems to me I've got all I want. If you only paid off the house, you'd be quite happy, wouldn't you? Said Mrs. White with a hand on his shoulder. Well, wish for £200 then, and that'll just do it. Mr. White, smiling and with an embarrassed look on for foolishness in believing the soldier's story, held up the talisman. Young Herbert, with a serious face, spoiled only by a quick smile to his mother, sat down at the piano and struck a few grand chords. I wish for £200, said the old man clearly. A fine crash from the piano greeted his words, broken by a frightened cry from the old man. His wife and son ran towards them. It moved, he cried, with a look of horror at the object as it lay on the floor. As I wished it, twisted in my hand like a snake. Well, I don't see the money, said his son, and he picked it up and placed it on the table, and I bet I never shall. It must have been your imagination, father, said his wife, regarding him worriedly. He shook his head. Never mind, though. There's no harm done. It gave me a shock, all the same. They sat down by the fireplace again. while the two men finished their pipes. Outside, the wind was higher than ever, and the old man jumped nervously at the sound of the door banging upstairs. An unusual and depressing silence settled on all three, which lasted until the old couple got up to go to bed. I expect you'll find the cash tied up in a big bag in the middle of the bed, said Herbert as he wished them good night, and something horrible sitting on top of your wardrobe watching you as you pocket your ill-gotten money. Herbert, who normally had a playful nature and didn't like to take things too seriously, sat alone and I lost my place, sorry. Where do we go? Well, this is awkward. Sat alone in the darkness, looking at the dying fire. He saw faces in it, real faces, and the last so horrible and so monkey like that he stared at it in amazement. It became so clear that, with a nervous laugh, he felt on the table for a glass containing some water to throw over. His hand found only the monkey's paw, and with a little shake of his body, he wiped it clean on his coat and went up to bed. Part 2. In the brightness of the wintry sun the next morning, as it streamed over the breakfast table, he laughed at his fears. The room felt as it always had, and there was an air of health and happiness which was not there the previous night. The dirty, dried-up little paw was thrown on the cabinet with a carelessness which indicated no great belief in what it could do. I suppose all old soldiers are the same, said Mrs. White. The idea of our listening to such nonsense. How could wishes be granted in these days? And if they could, how could £200 hurt you, father? Might drop on his head from the sky, said Herbert. Morris said the things happen so naturally, said his father, that you might, if you so wished, not to see the relationship. Well, don't break into the money before I come back, said Herbert as he rose from the table to go to work. I'm afraid it'll turn you into a mean, greedy old man, and we shall have to tell everyone that we don't know you. His mother laughed and, following him to the door, watched him go down the road, and returning to the breakfast table, she felt very happy at the expense of her husband's readiness to believe such stories, all of which did not prevent her from hurrying to the door to see the postman's knock, nor, when she found that the post brought only a bill talking about sergeant majors and how they can develop bad drinking habits after they leave the army. Herbert will have some more of his funny remarks, I expect, when he comes home, she said as they sat at dinner. I know, said Mr. White, pouring himself some beer, but for all that, the thing did move in my hand, I'll swear to it. You thought it did, said the old lady, trying to calm him down. I say it did, replied the other. There was no thought about it. What's the matter? His wife made no reply. She was watching the mysterious movements of a man outside, who, looking in an undecided fashion at the house, appeared to be trying to make up his mind to enter. In mental connection with the £200, she noticed that the stranger was well dressed and wore a silk hat of shining newness. 3 times he stopped briefly at the gate and then walked on again. The 4th time he stood with his hand upon it and then, with a sudden firmness of mind, pushed it open and walked up the path. Mrs. White at the same moment placed her hands behind her hurriedly and untied the strings of her apron. She put the apron under the cushion of her chair. She brought the stranger, who seemed a little uncomfortable, into the room, and he looked at her in a way that said something about his purpose, but something he wanted to keep secret, and seemed to be thinking of something else, as the old lady said she was sorry for the appearance of the room and her husband's coat, which he usually wore in the garden. She then waited as patiently as she could for him to state his business, but he was strangely silent. I I was asked to call, he said at last, and bent down and picked a piece of cotton from his trousers. I come from Maw and Megan's. The old lady jumped suddenly as in alarm. Is anything the matter? She said breathlessly. Has anything happened to Herbert? What is it? What is it? Her husband spoke before he could answer. There's. There, mother, he said hurriedly. Sit down and don't jump to a conclusion. You've not brought bad news, I'm sure, sir. And eyed the other, expecting that it was bad news, but hoping he was wrong. I'm sorry, began the visitor. Is he hurt? Demanded the mother wildly. The visitor lowered and raised his head once in agreement. Badly hurt, he said quietly, but he is not in any pain. Oh, thank God, said the old woman, pressing her hands together slightly. Thank God for that. Thank God. She broke off as the tragic meaning of the part about him not being in pain dawned on her. The man had turned his head slightly so as not to look directly at her, but he saw the awful truth in her face. She caught her breath and turning to her husband, who did not yet understand the man's meaning, laid her shaking hand on his, and there was a long silence. He was caught in the machinery, said the visitor at length in a low voice. Caught in the machinery, said Mr. White, too shocked to think clearly. Yes. He sat staring out the window and, taking his wife's hand between his own, pressed it as he used to do when he was trying to win her love in the time before they were married, nearly 40 years before. He was the only one left to us, he said, turning gently to the visitor. It is hard. The other coughed and, rising, walked slowly to the window. The firm wishes me to pass on their great sadness about your loss, he said without looking around. I ask that you please understand that I am their only servant and simply doing what they told me to do. There was no reply, and the old woman's face was white, her eyes staring and her breath unheard. On the husband's face was a look such as his friend the sergeant major might have carried it into his first battle. I was to say that Maw and Megan's accepts no responsibility, continued the other, but although they don't believe that they have a legal requirement to make a payment to you for your loss, in view of your son's services, they do wish to present you with a certain sum. Mr. White dropped his wife's hand and, rising to his feet, stared with a look of horror at his visitor. His dry lips shaped the words. How much? 200 pounds, was the answer. Without hearing his wife's screams, the old man smiled weakly, put out his hand like a blind man, and fell, a senseless mass, to the floor. Part 3. In a huge new cemetery some 2 miles away, the old people buried their dead and came back to the house, which was now full of shadows and silence. It was all over so quickly that at first they could hardly realize it and remained in a state of waiting for something else to happen, something else which was to lighten this load, which was too heavy for old hearts to bear. But the days passed and they realized that they had to accept the situation, the hopeless acceptance of the old. Sometimes they hardly said a word to each other, and for now, they had nothing to talk about. And their days were long to tiredness. It was about a week after that the old man, walking suddenly in the night, stretched out his hand and found himself alone. The room was in darkness, and he could hear the sound of his wife crying quietly at the window. He raised himself in bed and listened. Come back, he said tenderly. You will be cold. It is colder for my son, said the old woman, who began crying again. The sounds of crying died away on his ears, and the bed was warm and his eyes heavy with sleep. He slept lightly at first, and then he was fully asleep. until a sudden wild cry from his wife woke him with a start. "The paw!" she cried wildly. "The monkey's paw!" He stared up in alarm. "Where? Where is it? What's the matter?" She almost fell as she came hurried across the room towards him. "I want it," she said quietly. "You've not destroyed it." "It's in the living room on the shelf above the fireplace," he replied. "Why?" She cried and laughed together. Bending over, she kissed his cheek. "I only just thought of it," she said. "Why didn't I think of it before? Why didn't you think of it?" "Think of what?" he questioned. "The other two wishes," she replied quickly. "We've only had one." "Was that not enough?" he demanded angrily. "Oh," she cried excitedly. "We'll have one more. Go down and get it quickly and wish our boy alive again." "No, no." The man sat up in bed and threw the blankets from his shaking legs. "Good God, you are mad!" he cried, struck with horror. "Get it," she cried, breathing quickly. "Get it quickly and wish. Oh, my boy, my boy." Her husband struck a match and lit the candle. "Get back to bed," he said, his voice shaking. "You don't know what you are saying." "We had the first wish granted," said the old woman desperately. "Why not the second?" A coincidence," said the old man. "Go get it and wish," cried his wife, shaking with excitement. The old man turned and looked at her, and his voice shook. "He has been dead 10 days. And besides, I would not tell you before, but I could only recognize him by his clothing. If he was too terrible for you to see then, how now?" "Bring him back," cried the old woman, and pulled him towards the door. "Do you think I fear the child that I've nursed?" He went down in the darkness and felt his way to the living room and then to the fireplace. The talisman was in its place on the shelf, and then a horrible fear came over him that the unspoken wish might bring the broken body of his dead son before him before he could escape from the room. He caught his breath as he found that he had lost the direction of the door, and his forehead, cold with sweat, he felt his way around the table and around the walls until he found himself at the bottom of the stairs with the evil thing in his hand. Even his wife's face seemed changed as he entered the room. It was white but expectant, and to his fears seemed to have an unnatural look upon it. He was afraid of her. "Wish!" she cried in a strong voice. "It is foolish and weakly," he said weakly. "Wish!" repeated his wife. He raised his hand. "I wish my son alive again." The talisman fell to the floor, and he looked at it fearfully. Then he sank into a chair, and the old woman, with burning eyes, walked to the window and threw open the curtains. He sat until he could no longer bear the cold, looking up from the time and looking at the figure of his wife staring through the window. The candle, which had almost burned to the bottom, was throwing moving shadows around the room. When the candle finally went out, the old man, with an unspeakable sense of relief at the failure of the talisman, went slowly back to his bed. A minute afterwards, the old woman came silently and lay without movement beside him. Neither spoke, but silently listening to the ticking, the ticking of the clock. They heard nothing else other than the normal night sounds. The darkness was depressing, and after lying for some time, building up his courage, husband took the box of matches and, lighting one, went downstairs for another candle. At the foot of the stairs, the match went out, and he stopped to light another, and at the same moment, a knock sounded on the front door. It was so quiet that it could only be heard downstairs, as if the one knocking wanted to keep their coming a secret. I fell from his hand, and he stood motionless, not even breathing, until the knock repeated. Then he turned and ran quickly back to his room and closed the door behind him. A third knock sounded through the house. "What? What's that?" cried the old woman, sitting up quickly. A rat, said the old man shakily. A rat. It passed me on the stairs. His wife sat up in bed and listened. And a loud knock echoed through the house. It's Herbert, she screamed. It's Herbert. She ran to the door, but her husband was there before her, and catching her by the arm, he held her tightly. What are you going to do? He said in a low, scared voice. It's my boy. It's Herbert, she cried, struggling automatically. I forgot it was 2 miles away. What are you holding me for? Let go. I must open the door. For God's sake, do not let it in, cried the old man, shaking with fear. You are afraid of your own son, she cried, struggling. Let me go. I'm coming, Herbert. I'm coming. There was another knock, and another, and the old woman with a sudden pull broke free and ran from the room. Her husband followed to the top of the stairs and called after her as she hurried down. He heard the chain pulled back and the bottom lock open, and then the old woman's voice, desperate and breathing heavily. The top lock, she cried loudly. Come down, I can't reach the top lock. But her husband was on his hands and knees, feeling around wildly on the floor in search of the paw, if only he could find it before the thing outside got in. The knocks came very quickly now, echoing through the house, and he heard the noise of his wife moving a chair, putting it against the door. He heard the movement of the lock as she began to open it, and at the same moment, he did find the monkey's paw and frantically breathed his third and last wish. The knocking stopped suddenly, although the echoes of it were still in the house. He heard the chair pulled back and the door opened, and a cold wind blew up the staircase, and a long, loud cry of disappointment and pain from his wife gave him the courage to run down to her sides and then to the gate, and the street light opposite shone on a quiet, deserted road. And that is the story of the monkey's paw. Okay. So there we go. Monkey's paw. I don't know how many of you guys stuck around to that because I was reading and not really paying attention. But, well, first off, howdy, Ron. Good to see you. Hey, Jessica. Good to see you. Miss you too. Billy, good to see you. Just reading. And Amanda, yeah, I did lose my pace at one point. The problem was I was reading from a PDF and it glitched on me, so I lost the spot. So, hey, Carly. Hey, Lindsay. And Stacy, yeah, it's one of the great short stories. 1920. Maybe a sinister laugh at the end. I had today, actually, as I was reading through, I forgot how it had ended. So I didn't know that we were reaching the end right there. I thought for some reason, like the body of the son was at the steps or something. Anyhow, next time I'll prep a little bit beforehand. But like I said, we just did this very quickly that I just decided to go with it. So with that said, so that was the monkey's paw. If you guys want to send me other stories, I will read them, and I promise I will read them in advance so I can prep a little bit. But in between finding the fez, putting on a scarf, and then making my Curse of the Monkey's Paw cocktail, which I developed. Not going to lie, I may have prioritized making the cocktail over learning the story. And Carly says, had to read that one in sophomore English. Yeah, it's definitely like one of those old school stories you had to read early on. I love it. And also, it has longevity. There is the Simpsons Treehouse of Horror episode where, Homer gets a monkey's paw, I believe. And, he also ends up making, I forget the wishes he makes. But, of course, we all know that curses aren't real, right? Ooh, suddenly my drink got very red. I thought it was going to be a little more dramatic than that. It's all right. I put a glowing ice cube in my drink. You do what you can to get by on a Tuesday night in quarantine, right? Carly says post the recipe. I will certainly do that. Okay, before we wrap up, any thoughts, questions, anything you guys want to share? I will say, tomorrow night I am going to be doing something kind of fun. And it's not going to be here on Facebook. It's actually going to be a Zoom invite. So invite only. There's a bit of a velvet rope policy for a good reason. Let me show what I am doing. In fact, let me remove this banner. Wednesday, April 29th at 9 p.m., we are doing Pop Culture Zoom Trivia. The reason we're doing this is for the New York City Marathon. I am running the New York City Marathon in November, and I'm doing it for charity. I'm doing it to support the East Side House up in the Bronx. Now, this is a great charity. It provides education and educational tools to low-income, at-risk youth, but also their families. And normally money that they would raise would, be very helpful for the next year. But right now, the money that we will raise helps them right now, right this moment during the pandemic and during quarantine, because they're using money to provide meals for kids and for families, and also to get distance learning tools to kids, so that way they can keep up and stay in school. And I'm a big fan of education. This is really important because it helps families improve their state and also be more competitive with people that have better resources out there. It's important. So, but that said, it's going to be a fun time. The trivia part is happening at 9 p.m. Eastern time. It costs $10 to join. $5 of that goes to charity. $5 of that goes to a prize pot, which you too might be able to win. So you can Venmo me, venmo.com/Aaron Sagers, and I will provide you a secure link to log into Zoom to start playing. So I hope if you are able, you should join in. So that's Wednesday, Pop Culture Trivia for a good cause. So what do I think? Jeff asks, in the crowd, what do I think of the UFOs that were released today? Or yesterday, I guess. And then Jeff asked that, and then Jack says, are you the only one that remembers the government releasing those UFO videos last year? I thought those were different ones, but my thought on them, I haven't really spent a lot of time analyzing them yet, so I'm wary of giving much of an opinion. But I do find it interesting when you have these qualified pilots see things in the air that they can't explain. They are very rational, sober folks that I don't think, they know that it's not something that is, well, it could be another kind of unidentified aerial vehicle of another national origin, or it could be alien in nature. We don't know, but it's definitely something that that startled them or surprised them, and I find that compelling. Also, I think I should drink out of this monkey mug more often because it's very awesome. I did have another thought on my mind. Well, before I wrap up, I do want to say, so I'm pretty excited. I think you guys know I do talk about it enough, so I'm sorry if I'm talking you to death, but I do co-host the Nightmerica podcast, available on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, and iHeartRadio. And we this week, I'm very excited about the topic. It's can be quite tragic and painful. Violent. It's about beaches, and there's a story of a haunting on a beach, as well as a true crime, unsolved murder story on the beach. However, the thing that makes it especially fascinating is how this particular unsolved mystery might connect to the movie Jaws. And some of you might know what I'm talking about out there. But not only that, we do have a bit of a celebrity author that pops in and shares a ghost story in the episode. That drops tomorrow. So that's Nightmerica. Meanwhile, I do want to ask you guys, hit me up on Twitter and Instagram at Aaron Sagers, and keep in touch with the stuff I do over there. And glowing ice cubes. Yeah, I know. I should always use glowing ice cubes in my drinks. I don't know why I don't. I have a lot of them. Jeff, we're going to need a bigger boat, and you're going to need to download that podcast. And if you haven't, subscribe and share with your friends, even maybe your enemies, because maybe it's a good way to make your enemies not your enemy if you share this podcast. I don't know. I'm not saying that it'll bring people together, but I'm also not saying that it'll bring people together. So that said, unless anybody has any other thoughts or questions. Okay, so Stacy, if you use Spotify, you can't really rate it, but you can share it. The rating system really happens on iTunes, I think, primarily. But you can share with your friends, your families, maybe the like stranger on the street. Well, maybe not on the street because you're social distancing right now, but you could lean out your window and say, "Hey, stranger on the street, 6 feet away from me, listen to this podcast." It's a possibility. So, all right, friends, I am going to call it a night. I appreciate you listening. I hope that was somewhat entertaining. And I apologize for any stumbles that I may have had. Definitely had. But it was fun. It was good times. And I'll work on my voices too. Maybe next time I'll do like a Scottish voice or something. That's that monkey's paw. It's cursed. The cursed paw of the monkey. One of my best friends is really going to hate me for doing that accent because I did it so poorly, and he is Scottish. Just so keep it between us. Okay, you guys, have a great night wherever you are, and take care of one another, and let's do this again. Tomorrow night, we're not going to be doing this here, and like I said, I'm going to be doing the pop culture trivia, but I'll be back here Thursday at 9 p.m., and but if you're able to, I hope you can make it to the trivia tomorrow night. All right, have a good night. Happy Tuesday. Stay weird.